If I was a director of football at United going into the summer transfer window, regardless of who the manager is, these three players would be on my list to sign. An athletic and physically dominant defender who can play either as a right back or centre back, a ball playing centre back who is composed in pressurised situations and can play in a high defensive line, and a fullback who is arguably the best in world football at what he does and would radically change United's attack. I'll be discussing these three defenders that I'd sign after going through the players that I think United should move on this summer, specifically from the defensive part of the squad, as I'll come on to the midfield and attack in a future episode, just so this one isn't too long. But before I get into that, if you're a nostalgic football fan, then head over to Jersey FIFA. They've got all the Manchester United retro jerseys through the 90s and 2000s, as well as from other club and international sides as well. If you use code Atlantis at checkout, you'll get a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which I will leave linked in the description. So in terms of who gets sold this summer, there are obviously a few that just aren't good enough for the squad, but there are others that just from a business perspective need to get sold, because United for too long have kept players who could probably continue to do a job as squad players, but from a pure business perspective it was the right time to cash in on them. And because over the last decade really, United haven't operated in the way that clubs like Manchester City have operated, they've ended up keeping players and then just allowing them to go on a free, with players like Fred and Martial just perfect examples of this. And the first player that comes to mind is Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now I know a lot of people do like him, but he's got 1 year left on his contract come the summer. And so realistically, you either have to give him a new contract or allow him to leave. You can't keep him for another year and allow him to go on a free. I mean, what is the point in that? And for me, he's just definitely not getting a new contract. I mean, whoever you have as manager, even if Ten Hag was to leave and you were to bring in someone like a De Zerbi or an Unai Emery, Wan-Bissaka just doesn't have what you need from a modern fullback. You need someone like Dalot, who can move in field, who can play as a central midfielder, who can play multiple different positions, and ultimately they have to be good technically in congested areas, which Aaron Wan-Bissaka isn't. And even from a defensive perspective, yes, he's a fantastic 1v1 defender, but he's really just that tackling attribute that he has. Even from a positional point of view, I don't think he's elite at all. I mean, he often switches off at the back post, with the goal that Anthony Gordon scored for Newcastle this season being a great example of this, where he switches off at the back post, allows Gordon to run off his blind side. And for me, in this specific area, Dalot's just a better positional defender, he's got better spatial awareness, but overall he's just a more complete fullback. And so even if Aaron Wan-Bissaka had 2 or 3 years left on his contract, Dalot is being kept over him every day of the week. And so even though I do think Wan-Bissaka is a very good fullback and he could do a job for a lot of good teams, at the elite level he just doesn't have the technical ability. I mean, the only way I could see keeping Wan-Bissaka is if you go and appoint someone pragmatic like Jose Mourinho, but that's not happening, is it? So for me, it just makes sense to move Wan-Bissaka on. You could probably still get 20 to 25 million pounds for him. And to me, even the argument that he'd be the best player to have against someone like Mbappe or Vinicius Jr. just doesn't really hold water, because you can't keep a fullback just for that specific scenario for like 1 or 2 games a season. And even in that scenario, whilst he would be fantastic in those 1v1 situations, in possession he'd just be a liability. I mean, imagine if United were playing a Real Madrid or a PSG, and you have Wan-Bissaka at fullback. Yes, from a defensive point of view, he would be excellent at stopping Mbappe or Vinicius Jr. But in possession, in these big games, he'd be a liability, because sides would just target him by forcing United over to the right side, congesting the space and putting him under pressure, and that would result in United either going long or losing the ball in dangerous positions. And so for me, it just makes sense to move him on, and when I come on to the player that I would actually bring in to kind of replace him, you'll see that from a defensive point of view, United really wouldn't be any weaker on that right side. I also think Harry Maguire has to be moved on. I mean, he could be kept as like a 3rd or 4th choice centre-back, but he's on huge wages, he's also got 1 year left on his contract. It just makes sense to cash in on him now. He'll also be 31 in March, so I just don't see the point in keeping him. And even if United did have to subsidise maybe £3 or £4 million of his £10 million salary, they'd still be able to recoup about £15 million in an overall transfer fee, particularly if they sold to Italy or to another Premier League club. Rafa Varane's also another one that needs to be moved on. I mean, he's on £17.5 million a year, and he's likely not going to be a starter for United next season. His contract does expire at the end of the summer. It looks like United will reject the opportunity to extend it by a year, which for me is the right decision. I mean, you need to get those wages off of the books. In April, he'll be 31, he's kind of injury prone, and you can just get better ball playing centre backs than him, so for me it just makes sense to get his huge wages off of the books and allow him to go on a free this summer.
Casemiro is another one that has to be moved on. He'll be 32 by the end of February. He's on about £18 million a year, and realistically, he's not going to be a starter for United next season anyway, and he's declining season on season. I mean, last year he was pretty good for United, but this season, I mean, the athleticism is really going. I think it's just the right time for United to move him on. Get those massive wages off of the books. Hopefully a club from Saudi Arabia comes in for him so United don't have to subsidise those wages, because realistically if he's going somewhere like Italy, United are probably going to have to subsidise around £7 or £8 million a year of Casemiro's salary if he doesn't go to Saudi Arabia. So fingers crossed he actually does end up there, because then he's going to be on massive wages and United won't have to worry about subsidising the last 2 years of his contract. And so getting rid of Wan-Bissaka, Harry Maguire, Rafael Varane and Casemiro should allow United to get around £45 to £50 million a year off the wage bill, which is absolutely huge. And that's just the first 4 players. I am going to come on to the others, but I am going to address what I know people are going to say. They're going to say there's too many players leaving, we've got to keep Wan-Bissaka, we've got to keep Varane. But let me just go through the players who would be replacing them. So Jean-Claire Todibo is the obvious one. He's at Nice, which is Ineos owned. He'd probably cost between £40 to £45 million. And overall, I just think he's a massive upgrade on Varane, particularly in possession, but also out of possession as well. He's one of the best centre-backs in Europe, in my opinion. He's only 24 years old as well, so he's going to improve further. I think he'd work really well with Lisandro Martinez, bringing that added physicality, but he's also a player who's excellent in congested areas. The one criticism that you probably have of Varane in possession is that he is kind of clunky and awkward when he's pressurised, particularly when he moves into central positions, which he will have to do if Ten Hag is the manager going forward, or even if it's a De Zerbi or a manager of that style. And so I just think Todibo's a much better ball-playing centre-back. He's a better dribbler, he's just going to keep possession better, but he's also got the physicality and the athleticism that you'd want from a modern-day centre-back, allowing United to play that high-back line. But in terms of the Wan-Bissaka replacement, I'm going for Mohamed Simakan, because first of all, he can play as a right-back, can play as a centre-back. He's much better going forward than Wan-Bissaka. Despite him being about 6'2" in height, he's very good in possession, and he does provide those overlapping runs, and when he gets into crossing positions, his low crossing particularly is very good. But what I really like about Simakan is firstly his versatility. He could play as a right back, play as a centre back, play as a right sided centre back in a back three. But I also think similar to Konate and Upamecano, and even players like Saliba as well, but the reason I mention Konate and Upamecano is because they both came from Leipzig. Like those two, he's a very good 1v1 defender, particularly in the channels, which is massively overlooked when people are looking at centre-backs, because the problem with Harry Maguire is, if you go man for man, he's just going to get completely ruined in the channels. I mean, we saw it against West Ham when he made a couple of mistakes. There was one with a long ball where he completely misjudged, and so that does inhibit Ten Hag when he's looking to press high, because United can't go man for man at the back because Maguire just hasn't got the pace. But Simakan, like Ibrahima Konate, is just one of those defenders who in the channels is going to be able to dominate a lot of wingers, and even when he comes up against the best wingers in the league, I don't think he's going to have too much trouble keeping up physically. And whilst he certainly isn't as good 1v1 as Wan-Bissaka, who is really, and he's still good enough to play that role, but in possession he'd just be a massive improvement, carrying the ball forward, a lot more fluid in possession, and he can also play as a centre back as well, which Wan-Bissaka can't. Now, having thought about it for a bit, I've seen a bit of an issue. I was going to suggest bringing in Jeremy Frimpong for around £35 million, which is his release clause, to essentially be an Alphonso Davies type fullback, but from the right side. But Luke Shaw's injury until the end of the season has thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. Now, ideally we'd still have Alvaro Fernandez, and that left back spot wouldn't be as much of an issue, but apparently we didn't need him for the second half of the season or at all. And if Benfica do end up triggering the option to buy in his loan contract, we'll end up selling him for less than £10 million. And so now I'm thinking we might have to keep Varane and use Simakan more often as a right back if Dalot isn't playing, and then look to bring in a starting left back to play ahead of Malacia. I'd probably still keep Luke Shaw as a backup left sided centre back to Lisandro Martinez, but I just don't see how he can be a starter because he's far too injury prone at this point. So alongside Todibo and Simakan, I'd go big and look to bring in Theo Hernandez. I actually suggested that United sign Theo Hernandez 3 or 4 years ago. If you type in Atlantis football Theo
Hernandez on YouTube, you can probably find that video, and even though he is a few years older now, he's still only 26, 27 in October, and still one of the, if not the best left backs in world football alongside Alphonso Davies. AC Milan have been touting high figures for Theo recently, but given that he'll only have 2 years left on his contract come the summer, unless he signs a new deal before, it's probably the optimal time for Milan to sell him if they do want to get peak value. And with Theo only being on around £4.2 million per season, it's going to be hard for AC Milan to compete salary wise even if they do offer Theo a new contract. Now, Bayern Munich are reportedly also interested in Theo Hernandez, which is why I will be doing a video looking at alternative options to all of the players I suggest, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when that video comes out. But if United can get him for between 50 to 60 million pounds maybe, they definitely should do it, because Theo is arguably the most unique fullback in world football and would completely change United's attack down the left side. He has the same explosive ball carrying ability as Alphonso Davies, enabling him to burst out of the defensive third, carrying the ball in a way that's very reminiscent of Gareth Bale. And we can see how good he is with the ball at his feet as he ranks in the 90th percentile for both his progressive carries and his carries into the final third when compared against all other fullbacks in Europe's top 5 leagues over the past 365 days. And you can just imagine how valuable Theo would be when teams look to press United aggressively down the left side, as Theo has the ability to exchange a quick 1-2 before using his 400 metre like pace to then drive into the space, bursting through the press and progressing the ball up the pitch. But what makes Theo so good, and maybe even better than Alphonso Davies, is his ability to operate out wide but also in central positions as well. We've seen him do this under Pioli at AC Milan, making those underlapping runs into the left-sided half space, from where he's essentially just like another attacker because he's that good in the final third, and we'll see that statistically in just a second when we look at his FB ref report. In those attacking positions, we've seen how potent the overlap of Luke Shaw can be down the left side, but Theo would be on another level, being even more explosive than Luke Shaw, and also having winger-like output in the final third, both in terms of progressing the ball into dangerous positions, creating chances for others, and even scoring himself. But before I get into his FB ref report, if you do want some extra content, check out my Patreon, where you can get a 7-day free trial. I do have podcast episodes out on where Xabi Alonso should go next, my initial thoughts on who are the leading candidates for the Manchester United job, and an episode on the impact that Omar Barada and Dave Brailsford will have on Manchester United, alongside some unreleased tactical and player analysis videos as well. I'll leave that linked in the description. So back to Theo, and his FB ref report showcases how good he is going forward, with him ranking highly for his pass completion rates, and even though generally it's his ball carrying which is how he progresses the ball into dangerous positions, his progressive passing is also pretty good as well, but it's his goal creation and goal scoring which is where he excels. Now his numbers are slightly lower than what the eye test would show, and that's because he doesn't play in a sort of expansive fluid system that would get the best out of him. Instead, he's used in a conservative, quick transitional Pioli side, who particularly in the Champions League aren't dominating possession. And so even though his numbers here don't look insane, but rather just pretty good compared to other fullbacks in Europe, I definitely expect him to start getting into those 90th percentiles for his non-penalty XG, his non-penalty goals, and his XG assisted if he was to make the move to Manchester United or another top European club and play in the right role in the right system. I mean, this season alone he's picked up 4 goals and 9 assists in 34 games in all competitions, with around 15 goal contributions being the standard for him at AC Milan other than last season. And so with Theo Hernandez, United would have a serious attacking threat down the left side, playing in behind a left-sided attacker like Garnacho. Defensively, Theo, like Jeremy Frimpong, certainly isn't as good as he is offensively, which is reflected in his FB ref report, but he can definitely hold down 1v1s a majority of the time, with his pace and physicality being a massive asset, not just in the channels when defending, but also at the back post from crossing situations. So as long as United keep Dalot tucked in on the other side in possession, or use a rest defence with a double pivot to keep that left-sided channel occupied, Theo can be given the licence to push further forward, moving in between the lines and sitting in the half space, from where he can provide those dynamic over and underlapping runs. And also in the transition, Theo is going to take United's counter-attack to the next level, as his explosive ball carrying ability is better than anything United currently have, making United less reliant on Bruno Fernandes' Hollywood through balls to progress the ball up the pitch and into the opposition's half. So overall, I think selling Wan-Bissaka, Maguire, and if we assume Alvaro Fernandez leaves, that should bring in around 45 to 50 million pounds, as well as getting around 10 to 12 million pounds off the wage bill, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if Casemiro is also sold, that brings in a bit of money and gets huge wages off the wage bill as well, but I'll count him in the midfield section in the next episode. In an ideal world, you'd move on Varane as well and get his 17 million pounds off the wage bill, but as I said, you may just have to extend his contract for one more year because of the injury issues that United have faced this season. You could also look to move on Lindelof, getting around 5 million pounds off the wage bill and recouping about 6 or 7 million pounds in a transfer fee, but again, just from a numbers point of view, with Evans and Maguire departing, you may have to keep him around just for the last year of his contract. Now Teo, Simakan and Todibo would be expensive, around 130 to 140 million pounds, as well as around 25 million pounds on the wage bill, but it's a massive improvement to the back line. A starting back line of Todibo and Martinez, with Dalot and Teo either side, has the pace, physicality and defensive qualities at centre back to enable United to push one of Dalot or Teo forward in the press and go man for man at the back during certain phases of play. Whilst in possession, you now have two of the best fullbacks in the league, particularly Teo at left back, with Dalot capable of inverting in field and holding a deeper position, wherefrom he can utilise his progressive passing ability, creating a back three with Todibo and Martinez in order to give Teo the freedom to push further forward, playing almost as a 5th or 6th attacker at times. Simakan can come in and play either at right back or centre back, which would be crucial if Martinez is out or Dalot's out, and it would enable Todibo to play on the left side, and once again Simakan enables you to go man for man at the back when you are looking to press high up the pitch. Varane can also come in and play alongside Todibo or Martinez, with Willy Kambala, Lindelof and Malacia all being backup options as well. A back five of Dalot and Teo as a wing backs, with Simakan and Martinez either side of Todibo, looks incredibly enticing as well, and when I come on to analysing the likes of Inzaghi and Nagelsmann in future episodes, this defensive setup will definitely play a part.